Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really thrilled to be here as part of MoonCon. There have been such amazing speakers this entire weekend, and I'm truly honored to be among them. My name is Jhenah Telyndru. I am a Moonbooks author. I've written a couple of books for them. So the obligatory waving of the books. This is my book, Rhiannon, which came out in 2017. And I have a new one coming out, in fact, August 1st of this year, Blodaiwith. And it's currently in pre-order. And I just want to take a moment to show you this gorgeous, gorgeous cover by a really brilliant artist that you should all know. Oh my goodness. So a brilliant artist that you should all know, and I'm going to say the wrong thing because I always confuse his name with that of our Trevor, who is our editor, but Dan Goodfellow, forgive me. So beautiful work, check it out. So thrilled to have his amazing art on the cover of this book. And when we first started talking about doing MoonCon and having a bunch of authors come and talk in these 45-minute slots, which if anyone knows me, 45 minutes is not a lot of time, and I am a talker. However, one of the things I think that binds these two figures together is that aside from being from Welsh tradition, they are both sovereignty goddesses. And I've done a lot of work and research and writing and study on sovereignty goddesses. Just a little bit about me. I'm a Celticist. I have my master's degree in Celtic Studies from the University of Wales at Trinity St. David, and my master's thesis was actually on sovereignty in the fourth branch of the Mabinogi. The Mabinogi is the main story cycle from medieval Wales, which we believe has much older roots in older Celtic traditions, but is very medieval. And so it's an interesting thing being a practitioner and a pagan. I have been walking a pagan path since 1986. And to look at these later writings that grew out of older oral tradition and being able to parse out what remains of the older oral tradition that may have its roots in earlier Celtic pagan times, envisioned and presented through a lens of medieval, very Christian culture, has been an interesting thing. My undergraduate degree is in archaeology. And so it's kind of this mythic archaeology that we have to undertake, tracing folk motifs and mythemes and symbolism and even linguistics and divinity names to get to the heart of what's actually going on in a lot of these stories. And one of the most well-attested and identified and studied truly Celtic deity types is that of the sovereignty goddess. And it is an enormous, enormous topic to cover in a very small time. So what I want to share is a slice of that, particularly discussing one aspect of sovereignty goddesses in terms of their ability to shape change, shapeshift. And shapeshifting is, as anyone, I think, who walks a path that is influenced by Celtic traditions knows, is something that we see in many, many Celtic traditions and lore and the literature. And so it is a part of the magic of the Celtic lands, that shape changing. We have Selkies, we have changelings, we have really these metamorphic divinities and otherworldly characters that show up in tales across the gamut. And Wales is no exception, especially in the Mabinogi in the fourth branch. There's tons and tons of shape-shifting, but the shape-shifting that's associated with sovereignty goddesses specifically has a different purpose. It signals something very specific that's going on, and I want to talk about that today, to kind of break that down a little bit, to talk about the sovereignty motif, and especially to try to begin to parse out what those things mean to us today as practitioners who follow, who may or may not follow Celtic paths, or are influenced by those traditions, or perhaps just in terms of another practice, working with goddesses who are sovereignty figures in their own right. So I'm going to do a little screen sharing just for a couple of things to get us through. I welcome questions. And if I don't get to them in this 45-minute period, I do promise that any of your questions that you post on the side, I will return to where this video is going to be living on the Moonbooks page, and I will respond to them. So please forgive any, let's see. I'm going to share my screen with you so we can get to that. Here we are. Keep us on track and also give us a sense of what we're doing here. So shape-shifting and sovereignty. So as I said, sovereignty goddesses are very well tested in Celtic traditions, but what does that mean? What are sovereignty figures themselves? And just really briefly, as you can see, a woman figure who confers kingship and the right to rule over the land. She is found in various forms in medieval legends from Ireland and Wales, as well as in later English and French Arthurian tales. So we see iterations of it in various Celtic cultures. Some of them already existed in, when we talk about French additions to the Matter of Britain, further developing the Arthurian tales, which themselves grew out of Welsh and Cornish tradition. And of course, there is probably a bit of Irish influence in there as well. We see these figures popping up and evolving over time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that evolution, a little bit about those functions, and a little bit about what that says to us today in this very short period of time. I don't know if I've mentioned that. But in general, there are 6 main characteristics of sovereignty figures. And as I said, we're really going to focus on the last one here. But typically, she is a representative or embodiment of the land. So she can show up as literally saying that she is a goddess and a representative of sovereignty. Sometimes she's a tutelary figure and a literal embodiment of the spirit of place. Sometimes it's allegorical for the conference of sovereignty of the right to rule. Oftentimes they can show up as tribal ancestresses. So there are very different things. Usually they are connected to and tied to place. So there's a spatial sovereignty, but there's another kind that we'll talk about in a bit as well that isn't necessarily tied only to place. These sovereignty figures are often found in places and times of liminality, meaning these places that are thresholds, they're borders, they're boundaries. Often they are boundaries between territories, boundaries between political lands, physical boundaries, such as boundaries of rivers, riverbanks. Water is a huge space of liminality in Celtic tradition. So a lot of times these sovereignty figures are found at fords of rivers, next to sacred wells and streams. And so water is a powerful connection. So when you see a figure by the water, you know automatically that they are, well, not automatically, but oftentimes in breaking down the symbolism of a myth, water is a big sign. Boundaries are a big sign that you're dealing with an otherworldly figure. So we'll talk more about that water piece in a moment. They test the worth of kingly candidates. So they're challengers. They often present themselves in a way that gives a riddle, gives a challenge, gives a dare even, in order to prove the worth of one who would be king. And when a kingly candidate is found worthy, there is a process through which the sovereignty of the land is conferred, usually through sexual union or implied sexual union or symbolic sexual union. This is the sacred marriage that binds the king to the land. The king and the land are one. And so the health of the land is tied into the health of the king. Their fates are intertwined. And so how a king presents and comports himself in the world, his rule must be righteous, his physical form must be whole, because as he goes, so the land goes. So it's a very important process. The sovereignty figure is empowered to both grant and rescind sovereignty. So a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, all of the time, what is the key to maintaining kingship is being in right relationship with sovereignty. And right relationship means ruling well, being righteous, following the laws of hospitality, and all of the political and social mores, and comporting oneself with honor. So important, because the sovereignty figure is both the nurturer, the embodiment of the lands, but also protects the land, protects those boundaries, holds those spaces. And if the king, 10 years down the line, becomes unrighteous, she has the right and will remove the blessings of sovereignty. The king's rule is no longer supported by the blessings of sovereignty, and the land will suffer. And that is the thing. That is why the physical perfection of the king is important as well, because if he is lame, if he is ill, the land will reflect that in itself. It will lose its fertility. It will, its territorial boundaries will be violated. There'll be war, there'll be famine. So it's very important that the king both be whole and be righteous, especially. And she will remove that kingship from him. And that's where we see a lot of sovereignty figures also having a very martial aspect, because they will protect the land, they will take up arms, they will incite the people to battle, to root out what is not righteous, what is in a space of imbalance. And oftentimes the relationship that the king has to the land is reflected in the physical appearance of the sovereignty figure. And a lot of these 6 characteristics are able to be accomplished at once. So I think the most well-known sovereignty motif, and the one that's looked at is the encapsulation of the totality of it, although there are many variations, truly comes to us from Irish tradition, which was written down. The stories of Ireland were written down much earlier than those of Wales, and so in those places we have a lot of the gods are still called gods in particular stories, and so they maintain a lot of what we can imagine are more original aspects of being. And there is a tale, and I want to read a little bit of it for you, because I think it is so such a good example of what the sovereignty motif is. And so there is a Niall and his 4 brothers. They are in a place where they have to go and fetch water, and they go and they find this hideous hag who is guarding this well. And just to say, this is what the hag looks like. Thus was the hag, every joint and limb of her, from the top of her head to the earth, it was as black as coal. Like the tail of a wild horse was the gray bristly mane that came through the upper part of her head crown. The green branch of an oak in bearing would be severed by the sickle of green teeth that lay in her head and reached to her ears. Dark, smoky eyes she had, a nose crooked and hollow. She had a middle fibrous, spotted with pustules, diseased, and shins distorted and awry. Her ankles were thick, her shoulder blades were broad, her knees were big, and her nails were green. Loathsome and sooth was the hag's appearance. And so in turn, Niall and each of his brothers approached the hag and asked for water from the well, and what she asked for was a kiss. So they went to great pains to describe just how hideously ugly this hag was, and most of the brothers were like, heck no. A few of them deigned to give her a little peck on the cheek, and she rewarded them a little bit. But when Niall, of course the youngest, went to the, and I may, please forgive me, I may be pronouncing his name incorrectly. Irish is difficult. I don't know how to pronounce it, so please forgive. When he approached And the hag asked for a kiss in exchange for some water. He's like, heck yeah, not only am I going to kiss you, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to lay with you. And so he embraces her, and then something amazing happens. From becoming this loathsome, hideous, difficult to even look at, much less lay with, hag, she becomes the most beautiful woman ever seen. I mean, they even go into how gorgeous she was. She looked like snow in the trenches, every bit of her from head to sole. Plump and queenly forearms she had, fingers long and slender, calves straight and beautifully colored, and on, how gorgeous, just the most beautiful woman ever. And, Niall kind of notices this and asks, what's going on. And she says, I am the sovereignty of Erin, of Ireland. And she proclaims him king. She gives the prophecy that he will become king. And she explains to him, as thou hast seen me loathsome, bestial, horrible at first, and beautiful at last, so is the sovereignty. For seldom is it gained without battles and conflicts. But at last, to anyone, it is beautiful and goodly. So the sovereignty of Ireland was the first person to say, if you can't take me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best, which is true. And it is a powerful statement to make. And this is one of those tests of sovereignty. Do you possess the character necessary to be king? Can you face a challenge? Can you look beyond appearances? So very, very important piece, that when the king and the representative of sovereignty are united, when they are in a place of balanced relationship, what was once a hag, an ugly, loathsome creature, becomes a beautiful young maiden beyond reckoning. And aside from what we could say, perhaps some of the misogyny and ageism that is entailed here, what it's really talking about is the fecundity of the land, the fertility of the land. And there's this alchemical process that happens that when the king is out of balance, sovereignty becomes the hag. If he is physically unwell, again, sovereignty becomes the hag, because the fertility of the land is at risk. And so she will seek out someone to replace. And when that alchemical union of the worthy candidate and the representative sovereignty happens, she becomes beautiful again. The land becomes whole. The land becomes fertile once more. And we see this in various iterations through time. Because not only does sovereignty change shape herself, I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. No, I'll keep it on so that I'm not futzing around with it. Excuse me. But the figure of sovereignty both changes shape within the context of the tale, but over time, as culture shifts and tales evolve, especially in oral tradition as it does, how sovereignty presents herself in these stories also changes. So while in Irish tradition, again written earlier, she'll come out and say, I am the sovereignty of Ireland. In Welsh tradition, we do have sovereignty goddesses, but they're subtextual. They're not spoken of as goddesses at all, even, but they are also not directly stated to be sovereignty goddesses. But we can figure out that they are based on various things, based on their names, based on their symbols, based on their function in myth. And Rhiannon is one of those goddesses, and she's probably the best example of a sovereignty goddess in Welsh tradition, because she has all the trappings of sovereignty. She is associated with the white horse. White horses especially, and horses in general, are a very powerful symbol of sovereignty in Celtic tradition. And she is seen emerging from the other world, from a mound. She has this connection with horses. She takes several husbands and throughout her story arc, which is in the first and third branches of the Mabinogi. She has two different husbands. One dies, Pwyll dies at the end of the first branch, and then she marries Manawydan, who is Bran's brother. It's a whole big thing with him, and I don't have time to go into all of the details. But the land that she is associated with in Arbeth is is part and parcel, it seems, with the kingship of that land. And she is the one who is connected to the granting of it. Now, what's interesting about her is that, again, just as she is not overtly said to be a sovereignty goddess, her name, though, does mean divine queen, Rhiannon. She has this association, as I said, with horses. So in the same way as she's not directly stated to be a goddess, nor directly stated to be a sovereignty goddess, she's also not directly shown shifting her shape. But she does take on equine characteristics at several points in her story. And when we first see her, she's associated with this miraculous white horse that seems to be going at a very slow pace, but like otherworldly creatures do, defies the laws of time and space. And no matter how hard someone was to ride after the horse to catch up with it, they could not, even though the horse was going at a very slow pace. In fact, the faster they went, the further it went. The horse was from the pursuer. So there is that otherworldly magic piece there. Mounds, especially ones of wonder, like the Gorsedd Arbeth, which is where she emerged from, is associated with the other world. And again, she has this association with horses. She's doubled with horses. She gives birth to her son. At the same time, somewhere else in Wales, a twinned horse gives birth to a foal. And things happen with her child, and the place where that horse was birthed is where her disappeared son shows up. Now, this is a key piece because when her son disappears 3 nights after childbirth, there were 7 nurses who were set to care for the child, but the child disappeared and the nurses freaked out. And so they framed Rhiannon for the murder of the child, smearing her with puppy blood, insisting, all 7 of them swearing, attesting that they tried to stop her from devouring her child to no good aim. So Rhiannon is punished by her husband, Paul, and she is sentenced to spending 7 years sitting on a horse block outside of Arbeth to explain to all passers-by that she had destroyed her child and to offer to carry them on her back to the court. So she is not a horse, but she takes on these characteristics of a horse in this particular situation. In the third branch, she is it's a continuation of some of what occurred in the first branch, but her land, David, falls under an enchantment and everyone is gone. It has parallels with the wasteland mythos in later Arthurian tradition. And the wasteland and the Grail quest and all of those things do have a sovereignty component, which I hope I can get to really quickly. However, she and her son, who was eventually restored to her, Pryderi, are taken away in a magical fortress to the other world, where they engage in hard labor. And she is said to have worn an ass's collar and to labor like a beast of the field during her time in the other world. And so it seems like, again, she's taking on this horse-like quality. And it is interesting just to look at when that happens with her. When we first see her and she comes out of the other world, when she is being punished, when she is separated from her husband, the king. They are in an imbalanced relationship. And in the third branch, Rhiannon actually goes to find her son. He is trapped in this magical, it's a trap, fortress that appears on their land. He is stuck fast to a hanging cauldron. Manawydan was hunting with him. Pryderi went into this tower after their dogs, never came out. Then he came home, and Rhiannon's like, where's my son? And he's like, oh, well, he's stuck in this tower. He never came back. And she's like, I can't believe that you just left him there. So she herself went to go and find him, and then she too was trapped and then taken to the other world. And so even in that third branch, she's angry at her husband. So she's in a place of imbalance with him. And so when she's in a place of imbalance with her mate, with her partner, with her consort, it is at those times, or when she has no consort, it is at those times that her equine, that her horse-like aspect shows up, her otherworldly aspect. So we see that kind of occurring in again, very subtextual, very subtly, but so I've kind of outlined here how in Irish myth, very overt aspects of sovereignty. In Welsh myth, becomes subtextual and also symbolic. So there is a connection between what sovereignty does: confers kingship, rejuvenates the land. There's a regenerative process that occurs when that alchemical connection happens, and the cauldron of regeneration, the cauldron of rebirth. And there's one of the earliest Arthurian stories is the spoils of Annwn, where Arthur and 3 shiploads of his men go to the other worlds to get the cauldron of the sovereign of Annwn. And it will not boil the food of a coward. There is a testing aspect to this cauldron, and he goes there to obtain the sovereignty, or the symbol of sovereignty, from the other world. And this is believed to be part of what informed later Grail quests and Grail stories and its connection to Arthurian tradition and the restoration of the wasteland. In Arthurian tales, it is said that there were these courts of joy in the forests of Britain, and that any traveler going through would be presented in some of these hills that had these sacred springs, where a beautiful woman carrying a golden cup would offer food and offer drink. And it was the hospitality, right, of the other world. And there was one king who decided that he was going to take that that golden cup and rape the maiden of the well. And that is what caused the wasteland. There is that imbalance that is occurring because he did not abide by the rules of hospitality, and he violated the symbol of the figure of sovereignty, and so the land suffers. So there are a lot of many different streams of tradition that kind of entwine here. And still, in later Arthurian tradition, sovereignty then becomes, again, symbolic, but also becomes personal. And there's kind of this twist around. So even the story of sovereignty twists, even as sovereignty twists. And instead, we have this situation where where sovereignty is sought. The story of the Loathly Lady, who helps Arthur and his men answer a question. What do women most want? And Arthur and his men went out and they asked all the women of the land and put it all in the book, and they figured they would have the answer in the book. But she says, no, I know the answer, and I will give you the answer, but you must promise me that I can wed one of your noble knights. And so Sir Gawain decides to take one for the team, as it were, because the Loathly Lady is probably very similar to what we saw in the Irish tradition. She's often shown with a very pig-like face, another symbol of the other world. And on the night of their wedding, after she does give them the correct answer, and the correct answer is what women want most is their sovereignty. They're in the wedding chamber, and Dame Ragnall says, I'm under a curse, and the curse is this. I can be beautiful by day and ugly by night, or I can be ugly by day and beautiful by night. And I give you, my husband, this choice. Which would you rather me be? And Sir Gawain thinks for a moment, and it is heartening to know that he can learn. And he says, yes, well, you know what? I'm going to give that choice to you, my wife. And in that moment, the spell is broken, and she becomes beautiful, and she's beautiful all of the time, because that is what women want most. They want their sovereignty. So over time, with shifting culture and shifting place of women in society, what sovereignty looked like also shifts. But the underlying power of her story, the underlying power of her myth remains. So these are connected specifically to a very specific type of sovereignty. There are 2 major types of sovereignty. One is aperiodic sovereignty, where kingship is based on right rule, and the majority of these stories reflect that. But there is also something called periodic sovereignty, where kingship is annual or seasonal. And this kind of sovereignty is more prevalent in Mediterranean cultures, but it does appear also in those in Celtic cultures. But again, they're a little a little subtextual. And that is where Blodaiwith comes in. Because Blodaiwith is a goddess or a sovereignty figure. She's very misunderstood. And, you know, I spent a lot of time talking about her. In fact, this is what my master's thesis was about, that Blodaiwith is a particular type of sovereignty. She is a seasonal sovereignty goddess. So sovereignty figures like Rhiannon, for example, are spatial, right? They're connected to place. Whereas Blodaiwith, who is a figure who's created in the fourth branch of the Mabinogi out of the flowers of oak, broom, and meadowsweet, to be the wife of Llel, who is the son of, well, the nephew of Gwydion and Math, who is king of Gwynedd. He is told by his mother he can have no wife of the race that dwells on the earth. And so the magicians, Math and Gwydion, conjure up this figure, conjure up from the flowers of the land, Blodaied, the flowers, the woman of flowers. And she marries him. She's made specifically to wed him. But over time, she falls in love with the neighboring lord, with Granu, who is a hunter. And the two of them lay together for 3 nights. And they fall in love. Clay was out of town at the time. And before he returns, they decide that they're going to figure out how they can be together forever. So they plot a whole thing where Blodaiwith finds out how to kill Llel, which is not an easy thing, and makes it happen at that fateful moment on the banks of the river Cainval. Clay is in a place where he is not on the earth, and he is not on horseback. He is not inside, nor is he outside. And there's a spear that can only be created during Mass on Sundays for a year and a day. So a specific weapon forged during sacred times in this liminal place on the banks of a river, and between these, this almost impossible place to be. Really talking about this, this place of liminality, of thresholds, where the spear comes, and instead of being killed, Llel gets turned into an eagle. And then Blodaiwith and Granu are unified, and he takes over her lands, but her creator and Llel's uncles are, of course, magicians. They seek her out, they find her, and she gets turned into an owl and cursed to never see the sun again at night. And Granu and Llel face off again on the banks of the same river where Llel was hit with a spear, and Llel's like, well, you did this to me, I'm doing this to you. Sends a shaft into his heart, breaks his back, and kills him there. There is this thing here, then, on the surface, it looks like a very straightforward story of betrayal and adultery, but there's a lot more going on here. And I talk about this whole mystery in the book, but suffice to say that what is actually playing out here is the seasonal sovereignty motif. And it shows up in a lot of stories as a love triangle. And part of the way that you can identify it is when there are these reversal of fortunes between the two lovers, and there's often this the presence of of liminalities there, whether it's a year and a day, whether it's at boundary places or at boundary times, at fords of rivers. There are a couple of different seasonal triads that illustrate this. I call it, the balance between the solar hero and the otherworldly champion. The Celts had a very dualistic perspective on cosmology, light and dark, summer and winter. So the solar hero is order and this world. The otherworldly champion is disorder and the other world. And so there's a lot of motifs that are at play here, but we see this over and over again in these different tales, these seasonal triads, where there is that component of time. For example, Gwythyr and Gwyn in Culhwch and Olwen, which is a story that's often combined with the tales of the Mabinogi, fight every year on May Day for the hand of Craidd the Lad, and I've pronounced that wrong as well, please forgive me. and they will do so till the end of time. And so there is this sense of this summer and winter that the seasonal sovereignty goddess transforms and is the point at which the seasons turn. Sometimes it can be the turning of the year or the turning of the day, but it's usually the turning of the seasons. There's that seasonal component. And her shape shifting is related to which of her champions, which of her mates she is currently in relationship with. And so I'm going to come out of here for a moment. Her shape shifting is a little more subtle, but we see here, this is a beautiful statue of Bladaiwith made by Gott's Deity, gottdeity.com. Some friends of mine here in the States, here in New York, actually, and it really beautifully presents and represents this seasonal transformation. So, I mean, she's just covered with all of her flowers. I don't know if you can see it really well, but she has her dual aspect. And so when she is flowers, when she is Bladaev, she is the mate of the solar champion. She follows, like flowers will, the track of the sun in the sky. But when she is Bladaiwev, the flower faced the owl, she is the hunter in the night, and it is the chthonic deity, it is the otherworldly champion that is her mate. And so in this case, her how she presents and who she is and what she what she represents and who she favors at the moment is tied into how she presents in the world. So there's a bit of a reclamation of the idea that Gwydion changed her into an owl as a punishment. But those of us who have read the rest of the Fourth Branch know that Gwydion himself has also been punished, shape changed into a variety of animals by his uncle Math for, I don't know, starting wars, murder, rape, whereas Bladaiwith, attempted murder. But really, when he punishes her, he says, "I will turn you into an owl for the crime of dishonoring Flo." So it wasn't even that she tried to kill him or it was an accessory to an attempted murder, but that she dishonored his name. So there's a lot to these stories. There's a lot to these myths. There's a lot to these figures. But the thing I want you to bring home is this idea that sovereignty shifts in accordance with relationship with her. And if we look at sovereignty as the more typical aperiodic, where it is the connection with the king and the land and the relationship and the balance between the land and the king, why that's important to us today is that it really teaches us a bit about how we are responsible for being in right relationship with the land. Our leaders have to be responsible for being in right relationship with the land. And when we are not, what happens? We have climate change. We have local, just like the wasteland descended upon Britain because of the rape of the well maiden. It was a violation of the laws of hospitality. So too, the way that we have been treating our planet, using it as an endless resource, regardless of what is right and what is balanced. And we are going to, and we have already started to deal with the repercussions of that. The wasteland awaits us. And so there are those larger issues of how humanity in and of itself is not in right relationship with the spirit of the earth, the spirit of the lands where we live. And that's an important thing for us to do. And that can, I think, underscore and our activism around these things, around climate issues, around, protecting the water, protecting our lands, wherever it is that we are. But I also like to look at sovereignty from the perspective of our personal sovereignty. And in the Sisterhood of Avalon, we talk about sovereignty and we define it as fully conscious self-determination, knowing ourselves well enough to understand both the light and dark aspects, knowing that both the shadow aspects of ourselves and those parts of ourselves that are conscious, that are evolved, that are in the light, are who we are, and to be in balance with both parts of those selves, to be in balance, so that those both parts of ourselves are in balance with each other, that we consider ourselves as a whole. And the more we know ourselves, the better we can be in right relationship with our gods. And so we are challenged constantly. Our sovereignty is challenged. We are presented with opportunities for growth, for change, for maintaining a balance in our lives. And as we shift to meet those challenges, so too does that sovereignty within us become greater, become more whole. And I think that that is our work, to become personally sovereign by being in right relationship with all of the aspects of ourselves, right? To honor and bless, not spiritually bypass the parts of ourselves that need to grow, that need to change, that need healing, that need wholeness, that we need to seek the cup of regeneration, to seek the blessings of sovereignty, to bring change within ourselves. And the more whole that we are within, then the more resources we have without, so that we can do the external work to apply political pressure on the powers that be to take their rightful place and being in right relationship with the land and with the earth that we live upon, and to reflect those things in the greater scheme of things, which is that we need to live in balance with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us. And in doing so, we are in right relationship with our gods. And the stories of the past hold so much wisdom for the present, and we can assist and help in carrying that forward in the future, whatever shape those forces choose to take for us. It has shifted over time, it shifts within the stories, and it shifts within ourselves. So sovereignty of self is the key. Sovereignty in right relationship with our gods is that foundation, and then moving forward, the reflowering of Logres, the restoration of the fairy accord, the flowing of the courts of joy can begin once again, and we are in balanced relationship with all. So I think I've almost said it all in the allotted time, which is amazing. And so if there are any questions, I am happy to answer them here, or as I said, I will return to wherever this video will be living, and I will respond to questions there as well. So I am most grateful for your attention today. I hope there's seeds of something in here that has inspired you to look a little further and to seek out the ways in which you can live from a place of sovereignty. And again, just so you know, Ladaiwith is coming out on August 1st, and I go into a lot of detail about some of the stuff. I just scratched the surface. And Rhiannon also talks a lot about the evolution of sovereignty figures, and how we know what we know about her and about other goddesses in Welsh tradition. And thank you so very much. Many blessings to you all. Have an amazing day. Thank you.